I never could have imagined finding myself in such a situation. It all began on the day I took my husband to the doctor for a simple checkup. What was supposed to be a routine visit shattered my world. Dr. Lawrence, his expression grave, delivered shocking news about my husband. The seriousness in his eyes told me this was no joke. A wave of panic and disbelief washed over me. My husband, the man I had been caring for through his illness, was now a source of fear. Dr. Lawrence warned me to consider my own safety, suggesting I might need to get away from him. His words left me shaken and terrified. My name is Betty Friedan, and I am a 50-year-old woman who has dedicated 10 years of my life to a pharmaceutical company. That place had become my second home, offering me comfort and a sense of belonging. Despite my age, I continued to work full time, earning the respect and admiration of my colleagues. Few people my age still worked as I did, but that never bothered me. My devotion to my work was, in part, because I had remained single until just 4 years ago. My supervisor, Gerald, and I shared a close bond, partly because we were both unmarried. He once jokingly asked if I would ever get married, a comment that could have been misconstrued, but I knew he meant it in good humor. At the time, I was secretly dating Richard, the man who would become my husband. Richard was a bit older, previously married and divorced. I had no plans to have children. We had met through a marriage counseling service, both of us seeking companionship for our later years. We chose to keep our relationship private, sharing our plans with no one, not even when my supervisor made his light-hearted jokes. Ultimately, Richard and I married quietly, forgoing a ceremony and simply signing the necessary papers at the city hall. The simplicity of it all surprised me, but I was excited about our future together. But now, facing Dr. Lawrence's alarming warning, I was forced to reevaluate everything. My feelings of compassion for my sick husband were now tangled with fear and uncertainty. The doctor's words echoed in my mind, urging me to take action for my own safety. As I stood there, trying to process it all, I realized I had to make a decision, and fast. The life I knew and the future I had imagined were suddenly on very unstable ground. Richard works in a factory. To be honest, I earn more than he does. He started at the factory right after high school. As for me, I grew up in an orphanage and always dreamed of being independent. That's why I never wanted to leave my job at the pharmaceutical company, even after we got married. I loved my work too much. When Richard and I married, I told my supervisor, Gerald, right away. He congratulated me, but I could sense some mixed feelings. Perhaps he felt a bit lonely, since I, his fellow single companion, had gotten married first. I tried to joke with him about it, but he sidestepped the conversation, so I let it go. Despite Gerald's reaction, I was overjoyed to start a new chapter with Richard. I imagined all the wonderful things our future held, but reality turned out to be less vibrant than my dreams. Newlywed life was rather ordinary. Not much changed for me. I continued working, and the biggest adjustment was moving to a more rural area and commuting by car instead of the bus. Richard and I shared my old car, as he didn't have one. About a year into our marriage, however, things began to unravel. Richard started showing signs of depression. He seemed distant, barely touching his breakfast, often lost in thought. and would even confuse small things, like which spice was which. His clothes would be mismatched, and he grew quieter both at work and at home. While I had always appreciated Richard's quiet strength, his silence became heavy, making me feel as if I were living alone. That loneliness began to creep in as I noticed these small, yet significant changes in him. It was then I realized that Richard might be dealing with a mental health issue. It's incredibly difficult to watch someone you love suffer without knowing how to help. I decided to take Richard to a clinic that specialized in both mental and physical health, where he was diagnosed with depression. I had a basic understanding of the illness, but hearing the diagnosis made the world feel a little darker. The doctor explained that the best way to combat depression is to address the root cause, but identifying the exact trigger for Richard's condition was a challenge. He'd been at the same factory for years without any issues, and nothing significant had changed in his work life. If anything had changed, I worried it was our marriage that was somehow contributing to his state. During our discussions with the doctor, I assured him that we were living a happy life and couldn't pinpoint any direct pressures at home that might have led to the doctor encouraged us to return if we noticed any changes or had any new insights. Despite several visits to the clinic, we couldn't find the source of Richard's suffering. Over time, his depression only deepened. On his worst days, Richard would barely get out of bed, plagued by headaches or calling in sick to work. His appetite vanished, and he lost a significant amount of weight. Eventually, he couldn't continue working and had to quit his job. Richard felt terribly guilty about placing the entire financial burden on me, but I reassured him that I didn't mind working. My main concern was his well-being. It was hard to see him so affected, and I worried about him constantly, especially when I was at work. There was one terrifying incident where he went for a walk and couldn't find his way home, sparking a new fear in me that he wasn't just battling depression, but perhaps the early stages of dementia. This possibility only added to my stress. When my colleagues asked how things were, I had to admit that Richard wasn't getting any better. Gerald noticed I was particularly exhausted one day and offered me an energy drink. It helped a little, and I was touched by his gesture of support. "We're all in this together," he told me, and his words nearly brought me to tears. With everything going on, I hadn't realized how much stress had built up inside me. It was clear I had to stay strong, or I risked falling apart myself. So, I threw myself into my work, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. A year passed quickly, and things with Richard did not improve. In fact, they got worse. As our third wedding anniversary approached, I could see no light at the end of the tunnel. Then, one morning, I noticed our car was gone. Confused, I checked again, but the spot where I always parked, it was empty. Since Richard's diagnosis, I was the only one who drove. I hadn't used the car since the day before, so it should have been there. Worried, I asked Richard if he knew anything about it. He casually mentioned he thought the car was there when he came home from his walk yesterday. The doctor had suggested he try walking or jogging to help with his condition. If the car was there when he returned, it must have disappeared sometime during the night. With the car gone, I had to take public transport, which made me about 10 minutes late for work. I explained the situation to Gerald, who was sympathetic but puzzled. He wondered if Richard might have taken it, but I dismissed the idea. Given Richard's state and his aversion to driving since he fell ill, it made no sense. Despite his occasional memory lapses and mood swings, I couldn't imagine him being responsible. The mystery of the missing car added another layer of complexity to our already difficult situation. I reported the car stolen to the police, hoping it would turn up soon. But deep down, a nagging worry told me it might be gone for good. As if that wasn't enough, something even stranger happened. On the day I was due to be paid, I went to the bank to withdraw some cash, only to find my personal account was empty. I was stunned. We also had a joint account, which I checked next, only to discover it was at zero as well. It made no sense. Richard and I shared the joint account, but he had no access to my personal one and didn't even know my PIN. Yet somehow, our entire savings had vanished. A cold shock washed over me. As soon as I got home, I confronted Richard. I asked him if he knew anything about the money missing from our joint account. He seemed genuinely confused and denied knowing anything. Given his mental state, I was hesitant to press him further. Afraid of adding to his stress, Richard just stared at the ceiling, distant, lost in one of his frequent daydreams. It made me wonder if he really could have taken the money. As I prepared to report this to the police as well, I was gripped by the anguish of losing both our car and our life savings. The financial pressure was immense, made worse by the fact that I had no family to fall back on, having grown up in an orphanage. In the midst of all this, it was suggested that we transfer Richard to a larger hospital, one better equipped than the small community clinic we had been using. The clinic had done all it could and recommended a general hospital for better care, even providing a referral letter. So, we took a taxi for our first visit. The experience felt new and a little daunting. The entire ride, Richard was silent, lost in his own world. When we arrived, I took a deep breath, walked inside, and handed the referral letter to the front desk, preparing myself for a long wait. The waiting room was crowded with patients. After about an hour, Richard was finally called in. As he went through the door, I picked up a book to pass the time, but he had barely been inside the consultation room for a minute when a nurse approached me. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Simmons?" she asked. I confirmed that I was, and she explained that the doctor wished to see me. I was used to discussing Richard's condition, so I assumed this was a similar situation and followed her, though I felt a flicker of anxiety. The nurse led me to a different room, where I was met by a doctor who looked about 10 years my senior, with kind eyes and graying hair. Before I could even sit down, I asked if this was about Richard's condition. He nodded gravely, and I braced myself for more bad news. But the doctor's next words blindsided me completely. He advised me to distance myself from my husband, revealing that Richard had been imprisoned for fraud 10 years ago. My mind reeled in confusion. Why was this coming up now, during a routine medical visit? The doctor explained his suspicion that Richard might be faking his depression. He said he recognized Richard from a procedure he had performed a decade ago, where he had treated a deep gash on Richard's leg. The revelation was staggering. Here I was, thinking we were dealing with my husband's mental health, only to discover a hidden past and the possibility of a monstrous deception. This unexpected turn left me reeling, trying to reconcile the loving husband I thought I knew with the person this doctor was describing. When the doctor mentioned a large scar on Richard's right leg, everything started to click into place. I knew the scar, but I'd never known its origin, as Richard had always been evasive about it. To learn that the doctor standing before me was the one who had treated that very injury years ago felt like an impossible twist of fate. The story unraveled further. The doctor revealed that Richard had sustained the injury during a fight with his ex-wife, a fight that started because he had been cheating on her. He had stolen her luxury goods and a shocking amount of money. Back then, he had also feigned dementia, manipulating his wife into letting her guard down before he committed the fraud. This pattern of feigning illness to facilitate his deceit, it was sickening. The realization washed over me, cold and brutal. Learning of Richard's criminal past, of his time in prison, was a shock that resonated to my core. I had never investigated his background before we were married. After being alone for most of my life, I was simply happy to have found someone willing to be my partner. The doctor's warning that Richard could be a danger to me sent an icy chill down my spine. There was a gravity in his tone that left no room for doubt. The doctor recognized Richard from a previous deception, where he had feigned dementia to defraud his ex-wife. This revelation struck me with the force of a physical blow. I had been duped. In the days that followed, I struggled to act normally, all while secretly planning my next move. I had security cameras installed in our home, a silent witness to Richard's activities in my absence. Less than a week later, I noticed a watch and a handbag were missing. Reviewing the camera footage, I watched in horror as Richard left the house with my belongings, only to return later with a thick wad of cash, looking strangely pleased with himself. This was not the behavior of a man suffering from depression. The footage confirmed my worst fears. Richard was behind the theft of my possessions, my car, and our life savings. The harsh reality of his deception was devastating. He had lied and manipulated me, betraying the trust I had placed in him. He had feigned vulnerability only to exploit my compassion. It was clear I had to take action. A divorce felt like an insignificant response to the depth of his betrayal. Separation was necessary, but I wanted more. I wanted him to truly understand the gravity of his actions. With a heavy heart and tears threatening to fall, I meticulously filled out the divorce papers. The next day, pretending everything was normal, I told Richard I was stepping out for a bit. I had already taken the day off from work, and after explaining the emergency to my employer, I went to the police. I presented my case, showing the officers the videos I had captured of Richard's deceptions. They were initially hesitant, but after confirming his story with the pawn shop and tracking down my car at a used vehicle lot, the evidence began to mount. As the truth unraveled, I was overcome by a complex mixture of relief and sadness. The police, noting Richard's prior record, decided to act quickly. When I returned home with the officers that afternoon, I found Richard there, visibly surprised by my unexpected arrival and the sight of the uniforms. The divorce papers were still in my hand, but his attention was fixed on the officers as one of them declared he was under arrest for fraud. Richard protested, citing his depression as a defense, but I knew the truth. His audacity was disconcerting. For 4 years, he had lied to me, taking advantage of my trust, only to suggest, in a twisted reversal of blame, that it was my fault for being so trusting. His insolence was breathtaking. My patience evaporated. At the police station, My emotional outburst surprised even the officers, but it seemed to shake Richard's composure. As they finally put him in handcuffs, his arrogance crumbled, replaced by frustration as he was led away. Watching the scene unfold, I felt detached, as if I were observing someone else's life fall apart. Seeing Richard taken away felt surreal, like a scene from a film. That moment marked a turning point, allowing me to imagine a return to my life before the chaos of our marriage. Though a sense of relief washed over me, a wave of loneliness followed. Having waited more than 47 years to marry, the prospect of solitude cast a shadow over my newfound freedom. 2 months later, our divorce was finalized. Richard's future was uncertain. He was facing prison for his second crime. I could only hope the experience would lead him to sincerely reconsider his choices. In the aftermath, with our marriage dissolved into nothing more than a disillusioned memory, I found myself contemplating my next steps during a simple lunch at work. It was then that my boss, Gerald, approached. He sat with his store-bought lunch and, with a casual yet loaded tone, said, "I think you and I would be good together." The words took me by surprise, and it took a moment for their full weight to sink in. "I'm serious," he added, his tone gentle but sincere. I was speechless, my lunch momentarily forgotten. Gerald soon returned to his work, leaving me to contemplate his unexpected offer. The idea of a romance with him had never crossed my mind, but I couldn't deny the care and stability he had always shown me. His constant presence and responsible nature suddenly cast him in a new light. As I continued to eat, the seeds of possibility Gerald had planted began to take root, suggesting a future I hadn't dared to imagine. The thought of inviting him for a meal after work sparked a warmth inside me, stirring a sense of hope. Perhaps it was the perfect time to embark on a new adventure, to step out of my comfort zone and into a new beginning.